The church bell tolled in Stockton, Nebraska, on what should have been the happiest day of Madeline Bennett's life. Instead, she stood alone at the altar, her white dress gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows, as the murmurs of the gathered townspeople grew from confused whispers to a symphony of pity. William Stanford had been watching from the back pew, his weather-beaten Stetson clutched in calloused hands, when he realized the groom wasn't coming. Madeline's hands trembled as she held the small piece of paper the pastor had discreetly handed her, a hastily scrawled note from Thomas Reynolds explaining he'd left town on the morning train. She had given Thomas everything, including her virtue, believing his promises of love and family. Now she stood abandoned, carrying his child beneath the modest swell of her wedding dress, a secret known only to her. The church had fallen into an uncomfortable silence as the pastor cleared his throat, preparing to make an announcement. Madeline's face had drained of color, her blue eyes wide with humiliation and fear. She was the daughter of the late town doctor, respected but now penniless after her father's debts were settled. Without a husband, with a child on the way, she faced ruin. "I'll be taking Miss Bennett home now," a deep voice called from the back of the church. William Stanford, the quiet cattle rancher whose spread lay 10 miles outside of town, strode confidently down the aisle. He was 30 years old to her 22, a man who kept to himself but was known for his fairness and hard work. Madeline looked up at him in confusion. They had exchanged no more than polite greetings at town gatherings and the general store. Why would this virtual stranger step forward now? William offered his arm. "If you'll come with me, Miss Bennett." Too shocked to protest, Madeline took his arm. The solid strength of it was reassuring as he guided her back down the aisle, past the stunned faces of Stockton's residents. Outside, his wagon waited. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered as he helped her up onto the wooden seat. William's face remained impassive beneath his sun-bronzed skin. No woman should be humiliated like that. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "I'm taking you to Martha Wilson's boarding house. You'll be safe there until you decide what to do." They rode in silence through Stockton's dusty Main Street. The April sun beat down, unusually warm for spring of 1878. Madeline clutched her small beaded purse, the only possession she'd brought to the church. "My things are at my aunt's house," she said quietly. "I'll send someone to fetch them," William replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Martha Wilson's boarding house was a respectable establishment at the edge of town. The widow took in female boarders only, providing a haven of respectability for unmarried teachers and shop girls. William helped Madeline down from the wagon and escorted her to the door. Martha opened it before they knocked, her face a picture of sympathy. Word traveled fast in Stockton. "Come in, dear," she said, taking Madeline's trembling hands. "I've got a room ready for you." William removed his hat. "Mrs. Wilson, Miss Bennett will need a place to stay for a while. I'll cover her board." "That's not necessary," Madeline protested, finding her voice at last. "It's done," he said firmly. "I'll call on you tomorrow, Miss Bennett. We have matters to discuss." Before she could respond, he had turned and walked back to his wagon, leaving Madeline staring after him in bewilderment. True to his word, William arrived at the boarding house the following afternoon. Martha showed him to the small parlor where guests could receive callers under her watchful eye. Madeline had changed from her wedding dress into a simple blue gown that brought out the color of her eyes. She had spent the night alternating between tears and desperate planning, knowing her situation was dire. William stood when she entered, his hat in his hands. "Miss Bennett," he greeted her, his voice gruff. "Mr. Stanford," she replied, taking a seat across from him. I appreciate your kindness yesterday, but I can't accept your charity. It's not charity I'm offering, he said, sitting down and meeting her gaze directly. I have a proposition for you. Madeline stiffened. She may have been ruined, but she wasn't desperate enough to become any man's mistress. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I mean marriage, he said bluntly. I know about your condition, Miss Bennett. The blood drained from her face. How could you possibly? I overheard Thomas Reynolds boasting at the saloon 3 nights ago. He told his friends he was leaving town because he'd gotten the doctor's daughter in trouble and didn't fancy being trapped into marriage. Humiliation washed over her anew, so the whole town probably knew her shame. I need a wife, Miss Bennett. My ranch is growing and I need someone to make it a home. You need a name for your child. His voice softened slightly. I'll give your child my name. Madeline stared at him, trying to comprehend what he was proposing. You would marry me knowing I carry another man's child. The child will be mine in the eyes of the law and the community, he said simply. I won't have people whispering behind its back. Why would you do this? We barely know each other. William shifted in his chair. I've known your family since you came to Stockton 5 years ago. Your father saved my brother's life once. I admired him greatly. That's hardly reason to marry his disgraced daughter, she said bitterly. I'm offering you a practical arrangement, Miss Bennett. I need a wife. You need a husband. The child needs a father. He leaned forward. I promise to provide for you and the child, to treat you with respect, and to be a father to the little one. In return, you'll keep my home and be a proper wife in all ways. The implication of all ways made Madeline blush. And if I refuse? William's expression remained neutral. Then I wish you luck, but consider your options carefully. This town has a long memory. Madeline looked down at her hands. She had spent the night trying to formulate a plan. She could try to find work as a seamstress or laundress in another town, but who would hire a visibly pregnant woman? Her small inheritance would not last long, and what kind of life would her child have, born without a name? I need time to think, she said finally. William nodded and stood. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Bennett, I believe we could build a good life together. After he left, Madeline sat alone in the parlor, weighing her limited options. William Stanford was offering her respectability, security for her child, and a home. She barely knew him, but he had a reputation for honesty and hard work. He wasn't offering love, but perhaps that was for the best. Love had betrayed her terribly. By the time William returned the next day, Madeline had made her decision. She would accept his proposal, not out of love or even gratitude, but out of necessity and a fierce determination to protect her unborn child. The marriage was a quiet affair, performed by the same pastor who had been prepared to join her to Thomas just days earlier. Martha Wilson and her housekeeper stood as witnesses. Madeline wore a simple gray dress, appropriate for a widow starting a new marriage rather than a bride experiencing her first. William wore his good suit, his usually untamed brown hair slicked back with pomade. He placed a plain gold band on her finger and spoke his vows clearly and without hesitation. As they drove away from town toward the Stanford ranch, Madeline stared at the unfamiliar countryside, wondering what kind of life she had just committed herself to. It's not much further, William said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. About 3 miles past that ridge. When they crested the hill, Madeline caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The Stanford ranch was larger than she had imagined. A sturdy 2-story house painted white stood in a clearing, surrounded by several outbuildings. A corral held horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed in fenced pastures. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and well maintained. How long have you lived here? She asked. Built the house 6 years ago. The land's been in my family for 15 years. My father started with nothing but 50 acres and built it to over 500 before he passed. My brother Matthew and I have doubled that since. Your brother lives here too. This was unexpected news. William nodded. He has a cabin about a half-mile yonder, prefers his own space. You'll meet him soon enough. There's also Frank Miller, our foreman, and 2 hired hands who bunk in the bunkhouse. They take their meals at the cookhouse except for Sunday dinner, which they'll take with us. Madeline tried to absorb this information. She had assumed she and William would be alone at the ranch. The prospect of cooking for and keeping house for several men was daunting, especially given her limited domestic experience. As the town doctor's daughter, she'd been educated at a ladies' seminary in St. Louis and had only basic skills in cooking and housekeeping. "I hope you won't be disappointed," she said hesitantly. "I'm not very experienced in running a ranch household." William glanced at her. "You'll learn. Mrs. Miller, Frank's wife, has been coming in 3 days a week to cook and clean. She'll help you get settled." Relief flooded through Madeline. At least she wouldn't be thrown into her duties without guidance. William pulled the wagon up to the house and helped her down. Up close, the house was even more impressive. The porch wrapped around 2 sides with a swing at one end. The door was solid oak with a brass knocker. "Come inside," William said, carrying her trunk. "I'll show you around." The interior was simply furnished but comfortable. A parlor to the right of the entrance held a settee, 2 armchairs, and a small table. To the left was a dining room with a large oak table that could seat 10. Beyond that was a spacious kitchen with a modern cast iron stove, a pump at the sink, and a large pantry. "Bedrooms are upstairs," William said, leading the way up a wide staircase. "Ours is at the end of the hall." The master bedroom was large, dominated by a 4-poster bed covered with a blue and white quilt. A chest of drawers, a wardrobe, and a washstand completed the furnishings. A window overlooked the pastures. "I cleared space in the wardrobe and the top 3 drawers of the chest for your things," William said, setting her trunk down. "There's a room across the hall that would make a good nursery when the time comes." The mention of the baby brought Madeline back to reality. This was not a love match but a practical arrangement for the sake of her child. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's a lovely home." William shifted uncomfortably. "I'll let you get settled. Supper's at 6. The kitchen's stocked, but if you're not up to cooking tonight, there's cold ham and biscuits in the pantry." After he left, Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden changes in her life. A week ago, she had been preparing to marry Thomas, believing she was deeply in love. Now she was married to a virtual stranger, carrying another man's child and expected to run a ranch household. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of tears before she began unpacking her trunk. She had made her choice, and now she would make the best of it, for her child's sake. The first weeks of marriage were a delicate dance of learning to coexist with a stranger. William was unfailingly polite but distant. He rose before dawn and often returned only for meals, spending his days working with the cattle, mending fences, or in town on business. They shared the large bed, but he kept to his side, never touching her except for an occasional brush of hands when passing dishes at the table. Madeline threw herself into learning to manage the household. Clara Miller, the foreman's wife, was a godsend. A robust woman in her 50s with graying hair and work-hardened hands, she took Madeline under her wing, teaching her to bake bread, preserve vegetables from the kitchen garden, and manage the household accounts. "You're doing just fine, Mrs. Stanford," Clara assured her after Madeline's first successful Sunday dinner for the ranch hands. "Those men haven't eaten this well since you came." The name still felt strange. Mrs. Stanford, a name she had earned not through love but through necessity. Matthew Stanford made infrequent appearances at the main house, usually for Sunday dinner. He was leaner than William, but with the same steady gray eyes and reserved manner. He was polite to Madeline, but watched her with a wariness that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of her worthiness to be a Stanford. As May turned to June, Madeline's pregnancy became more visible. She let out her dresses as much as possible, but soon she would need proper maternity clothes. She dreaded bringing up the subject with William, unsure how he truly felt about raising another man's child. One evening, as they sat in the parlor after dinner, William reading a newspaper, Madeline mending a shirt, she gathered her courage. "William," she said hesitantly, "I will need to order some different clothes soon." He looked up from his paper, his eyes dropping briefly to her mid-sly swollen abdomen. "Of course. Make a list of what you need and I'll take it to the mercantile next time I'm in town." "Thank you," she said, returning to her mending. After a moment, William folded his paper. "How are you feeling? With the baby, I mean." The question surprised her. He rarely mentioned her pregnancy. "Well enough. Some mornings are difficult, but it passes." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Clara mentioned you've been working too hard in the garden. You should rest more." "I'm not an invalid," Madeline said, a touch defensively, "and I enjoy the garden. Still, the heat's getting stronger. Best to work in the early morning or evening." It was the most personal conversation they'd had in weeks. Madeline realized with surprise that he was concerned for her welfare. "I will be careful," she promised. William returned to his newspaper, but Madeline caught him watching her several times during the evening, a thoughtful expression on his face. The next day, Madeline returned from hanging laundry to find a wooden rocking chair on the porch, positioned to catch the afternoon breeze and offer a view of the distant mountains. "Thought you might like somewhere comfortable to sit when you take a break," William said gruffly when she thanked him. "Matthew made it. He's good with woodworking." It was a small gesture, but it touched her deeply. Perhaps this marriage of convenience could evolve into something resembling companionship, if not love. June brought scorching heat to Nebraska, and with it, trouble. The creek that fed the ranch's irrigation system began to dry up, threatening the vegetable garden and the hay fields that would provide winter feed for the cattle. William spent days digging a new well closer to the house, coming in for meals covered in dirt and sweat. Madeline, now 5 months pregnant, worried about his exhaustion but admired his determination. This land and this ranch were clearly his life's work. One evening, as she brought him a glass of cool water at the well site, she found him sitting on the edge of the half-dug hole, his head in his hands. "William, are you unwell?" she asked, alarmed. He looked up, and for the first time she saw genuine fear in his eyes. "If this well doesn't produce water, we're in trouble. The cattle are already showing signs of thirst." Madeline sat beside him, heedless of her dress on the dusty ground. "Is there nothing else to be done? We could try to dig deeper at the old well, but Frank thinks it's run dry." "Without water, we'll lose the cattle." He ran a hand through his hair. "Everything I've worked for, everything my father built." Without thinking, Madeline placed her hand on his arm. "You won't lose it. We'll find a solution." William looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression. "We," he repeated softly. "Yes, we," she said firmly. "This is my home now, too." He covered her hand with his own, the first intentional touch he'd initiated since their wedding. "Thank you, Madeline." That night, for the first time, William reached for her in bed. His touch was gentle, questioning. Madeline surprised herself by responding. Their lovemaking was careful, mindful of her condition, but unexpectedly tender. Afterward, he kept his arm around her, her head resting on his chest. "I never asked if you were happy here," he said into the darkness. Madeline considered the question. "I'm finding my place," she answered truthfully. "It's not what I expected my life to be, but I'm grateful for your kindness." "It's not kindness," he said after a pause. "You've made this house a home. The men comment on it. Even Matthews noticed." Coming from William, this was high praise indeed. Madeline felt a warm glow of accomplishment. "The baby moved today," she said impulsively. Would you? Would you like to feel it?" There was a heartbeat of hesitation before William placed his large hand on the swell of her stomach. The baby obligingly kicked, and William's sharp intake of breath told her he'd felt it. "Strong," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's good." In that moment, something fundamental changed between them. The child, which had been an abstract concept to William, a duty he had accepted, became real. And Madeline, watching his face in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains, felt the first stirring of something she had not expected to feel again: hope. The next morning at breakfast, William announced, "I'm bringing in a water diviner from Lincoln. Fellow named Jacobson who's supposed to be the best. He'll be here the day after tomorrow." Madeline nodded, serving him eggs and biscuits. "That sounds like a good plan." "It's expensive," he admitted, "but worth it if he can find water." 2 days later, Ezra Jacobson arrived, a wizened man with sharp eyes and a forked willow branch. He spent the day walking the property, the branch held before him. William followed, his expression skeptical but desperate. By sunset, Jacobson had marked 3 spots where he believed water could be found. "This one," he said, pointing to a location about a quarter-mile from the house. "This is your best bet. Dig here and you'll find water within 20 feet. William paid him his fee, and the next morning at dawn he, Matthew, and the ranch hands began to dig. Madeline brought them water and food throughout the day, anxiously watching their progress. At 15 feet, the soil became damp. At 18, water began to seep into the hole. By nightfall, they had a promising well that would need to be lined with stone but would provide the water the ranch desperately needed. The celebration that night was jubilant. Madeline prepared a feast, and even the usually taciturn Matthew joined in the laughter and relief. To Mrs. Stanford, Frank Miller proposed a toast, who kept us fed and watered while we dug for the ranch's future. William raised his glass. "To my wife," he said, his eyes meeting hers across the table, "the heart of this home." Madeline blushed at the unexpected praise and the warmth in his gaze. For the first time, she felt truly accepted as Mrs. Stanford, not just a convenient solution to a difficult situation. As July turned to August, Madeline's pregnancy advanced. Her movements became slower, more deliberate. William insisted on hiring a young girl from town, Sarah Miller, Frank's niece, to help with the heavier household chores. "I can still manage," Madeline protested. "I know you can," William said, "but you don't have to do everything yourself." His concern touched her. It was becoming harder to remember that theirs was a marriage of convenience, not affection. William now sought her company in the evenings, asking about her day, sharing news from town or concerns about the ranch. They had established a comfortable routine, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. One hot August afternoon, as Madeline rested in the rocking chair on the porch, a cloud of dust appeared on the road leading to the ranch. She shaded her eyes, trying to identify the rider. As the horse and rider drew closer, her blood ran cold. She would recognize that cocky posture anywhere. Thomas Reynolds. Her hands instinctively went to her swollen abdomen, as if to protect the child from its biological father. What was he doing here? Why had he returned to Stockton after 4 months? Thomas reined in his horse at the foot of the porch steps. Madeline, he called, his familiar voice sending a shiver of revulsion through her. You're looking, well. His eyes lingered on her stomach. What do you want, Mr. Reynolds? She asked coldly. He dismounted and took a step toward the porch. I came to talk. Is that any way to greet an old friend? We are not friends, she said firmly. Please leave. Thomas's handsome face hardened. I heard you married Will Stanford. Didn't waste any time, did you? Unlike some, Mr. Stanford is a man of honor. Madeline rose from her chair, one hand on her back to support the weight of her pregnancy. I made a mistake, Maddie, Thomas said, his voice softening to the persuasive tone she once found irresistible. I panicked when you told me about the baby, but I've had time to think. I want to make things right. It's too late for that, Madeline replied. I'm married now, to a man you barely know. Thomas took another step forward. Do you love him? Or was he just convenient? The question struck too close to home to doubts Madeline herself had harbored. My feelings for my husband are none of your concern. That baby is my flesh and blood, Thomas insisted. I have rights. You forfeited any rights when you abandoned me at the altar, Madeline said, her voice rising. You made your choice, Thomas. Now live with it. Is there a problem here? William's voice, calm but with an edge of steel, came from behind Madeline. She hadn't heard him approach from the barn. Thomas straightened, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip. Stanford, just having a conversation with Madeline. Mrs. Stanford, William corrected, moving to stand beside his wife. And it seems the conversation is over. This isn't your concern, Thomas said. That's my child she's carrying. No, William said firmly. It's my child, my wife, my home, and you're trespassing. Thomas's face flushed with anger. You can't just claim another man's child. I didn't claim anything, William interrupted. I married a woman who deserved better than she got from you. The child will have my name and my protection. That's all that matters. Madeline felt a surge of gratitude and something more pride in the man who stood beside her, defending her and a child not of his blood. Maddie, Thomas pleaded, we were going to be married. We were in love. No, Madeline said, her voice steady. You never loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have left me standing alone in church, humiliated and terrified. William placed a protective arm around her shoulders. I think you should leave now, Reynolds, and don't come back. Thomas looked from William to Madeline, his expression hardening. This isn't over, he warned, mounting his horse. I'll be in town for a while. When you come to your senses, Maddie, you know where to find me. They watched him ride away, dust billowing behind his horse. Madeline was trembling, though whether from anger or fear she couldn't tell. Are you all right? William asked, his arm still around her. Yes, she said, though her voice shook. I'm sorry he came here. You have nothing to apologize for. William guided her back to the rocking chair. Sit down. You're pale. Madeline sank into the chair, her heart racing. What if he tries to take the baby? Legally, he could have a claim. No, William said firmly. The law is clear. Any child born within a marriage belongs to the husband regardless of circumstances. The baby will be a Stanford, Madeline, I promise you that. She looked up at him, this man who had rescued her from disgrace and was now promising to protect her child from its own father. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. William knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. I meant what I said. This is your home, and that child is mine in all the ways that matter. He hesitated, then added, I may not have chosen this path for the right reasons at first, but I don't regret it, not for a moment. Madeline squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They sat in silence as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the yard. That night, as they prepared for bed, Madeline finally voiced the question that had been troubling her since Thomas's visit. William, why did you really marry me? The truth. William paused in the act of removing his boots. "I told you. I needed a wife, and you needed a husband. But there were other unmarried women in Stockton," she persisted. "Why choose one who was carrying another man's child?" He was silent for so long that Madeline thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I've watched you for years, Madeline, at church socials, at the general store, walking with your father. You were always kind, always smiling. When I heard what Reynolds had done," his fists clenched at the memory, "I couldn't bear to see that smile disappear." The simple honesty of his answer moved her deeply. "And now, do you ever regret your decision?" William crossed to where she sat at her dressing table. "No," he said, his gray eyes holding hers in the mirror. "I regret that you had to suffer, but I will never regret making you my wife." He bent and pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, a gesture so tender it brought tears to Madeline's eyes. "Now come to bed," he said gruffly. "You need your rest." As Madeline lay beside him in the darkness, she realized that somewhere along the way, this marriage of convenience had become something more. Not yet love, perhaps, but something real and solid that might, with time, grow into love. The next morning, William announced he needed to go into town for supplies. "I'll be back before supper. Matthew and Frank know you're alone. They'll keep an eye on the house." Madeline nodded, trying not to show her nervousness at the thought of being alone with Thomas potentially nearby. "Be careful," she said. William hesitated, then cupped her cheek in his hand. "Always," he promised, and kissed her briefly before heading out. In town, William's first stop was the general store, where he ordered the supplies the ranch needed. Then he made his way to the saloon where Thomas Reynolds was staying in one of the upstairs rooms. He found Thomas at a table, playing cards with two strangers. "Reynolds, a word." Thomas looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Stanford. Didn't expect to see you in town so soon." "Outside," William said tersely. The two men stepped out into the dusty street. William led the way to a quiet spot between buildings. "I want you to leave Stockton," William said without preamble. "Today," Thomas smirked. "Or what?" "You'll run me out of town." "This isn't the Dark Ages, Stanford." "No, but it is a small town with a long memory. People here remember how you left a woman at the altar, how you boasted about getting the doctor's daughter with child and then running off rather than facing your responsibilities." "I came back, didn't I?" Thomas countered. "I'm trying to make things right." 4 months too late," William said coldly. "Madeline is my wife now. The child will be my son or daughter. There's no place for you in their lives." "That's for Madeline to decide," Thomas insisted. "She already has," William said, "but you're too selfish to accept it." Thomas's face darkened. "You think you're better than me, the silent rancher who swooped in to save the damsel in distress. You're raising another man's bastard, Stanford. How does that make you feel?" William's fists clenched, but he kept his temper. "It makes me feel like a man who knows what matters. Family, honor, love." The last word slipped out before he could stop it. Thomas caught it, his eyes narrowing. "Love, you think Madeline loves you?" He laughed harshly. "She was desperate, Stanford. Any port in a storm." William stepped closer, his voice dangerously quiet. "If you ever come near my wife or my child again, you'll answer to me. And I promise you, Reynolds, it won't end well." Something in William's tone or expression must have convinced Thomas he was serious. The younger man took a step back. "You can't keep her if she doesn't want to stay." "I'm not keeping her," William said. "I'm protecting her from a man who already broke her heart once. If you truly care for her at all, you'll leave her in peace." With that, William turned and walked away, his back straight, his steps measured. He had one more stop to make before returning to the ranch. At the sheriff's office, he found Sheriff Hawkins dozing at his desk. The lawman jerked awake at William's entrance. "Stanford, what brings you to town?" Everything all right at the ranch? William took a seat across from the sheriff. I wanted to make you aware of a situation, Joe. Thomas Reynolds is back in town. The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose. The fellow who left Doc Bennett's girl at the altar. I heard something about that. He came to my ranch yesterday, claiming rights to my wife's unborn child. Sheriff Hawkins whistled low. That's a complicated situation, Will. Not to me, William said firmly. Madeline is my wife. The child will be mine by law, but Reynolds is causing her distress, and I won't have it. What do you want me to do? The sheriff asked. He hasn't broken any laws. Just keep an eye on him, and if he causes trouble. William let the sentence hang. Sheriff Hawkins nodded. I understand. For what it's worth, Will, I think you did a fine thing stepping up for Miss Bennett, Mrs. Stanford, I mean. Not many men would have. William stood to leave. It wasn't charity, Joe. It was the best decision I ever made. When William returned to the ranch, he found Madeline on the porch, her face anxious. She rose as he approached. You were gone so long, she said. I was worried. Had a few extra errands, he explained, helping her back to her chair. Everything's fine. Did you see Thomas? She asked, her hands twisting in her lap. William hesitated, then nodded. I did. What did he say? What did you say? The questions tumbled out. I told him to leave you alone, William said simply. That you're my wife and the baby is my child. Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. And what did he say to that? It doesn't matter. William knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. What matters is what you say, what you want. Madeline looked into his earnest gray eyes, this man who had given her his name, his home, and his protection without asking for anything in return. I want to stay here, she said softly. With you. William's expression softened. Then that's what will happen. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Madeline felt the baby kick particularly hard. She took William's hand and placed it on her stomach. Feel that. I think it's an elbow or a foot. William's face lit with wonder as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Strong, he said approvingly. Like his mother, or her mother, Madeline corrected with a smile. It could be a girl. Boy or girl, it doesn't matter, William said, his hand still on her abdomen. Just healthy and happy. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Madeline realized that, for the first time in months, she felt truly at peace. The specter of Thomas Reynolds and the shame of her abandonment seemed distant, overshadowed by the quiet strength of the man beside her and the promise of the family they would soon become. September brought cooler weather and the harvest of the kitchen garden. Madeline, now in her 8th month, moved more slowly but insisted on supervising the preservation of vegetables for the winter. William watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern, often stepping in to lift heavy jars or reach high shelves. You should rest more, he said one afternoon, finding her canning tomatoes in the sweltering kitchen. I'm fine, she assured him, wiping sweat from her brow. The baby's not due for another month. Still, William insisted, taking the ladle from her hand. Let Sarah finish this. Come sit with me on the porch. There's a nice breeze. Reluctantly, Madeline allowed herself to be led outside. The truth was, she was tired, her back aching from the weight of the baby. But she was determined to prove her worth as William's wife, to earn the name and protection he had given her. As they sat in companionable silence, Madeline suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. What is it? William asked, alarmed. Nothing, just a strong kick, she said, but her face betrayed her discomfort. William frowned. I'm sending for the doctor. That's not necessary. Humor me, he interrupted, already standing. I'll send one of the hands now. Dr. Martin arrived an hour later, a jovial man who had taken over the practice after Madeline's father died. He examined her thoroughly while William waited anxiously outside the bedroom door. "Everything seems normal," the doctor said afterward, addressing both of them in the parlor. "The baby's positioned correctly and has a strong heartbeat. But first babies sometimes come early, Mrs. Stanford. You should take it easy these next few weeks." "I'll make sure she does," William promised, relief evident in his voice. After the doctor left, Madeline found herself confined to light duties only under William's watchful eye. "You're being overprotective," she protested. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but I won't take chances with you or the baby." His concern warmed her heart even as it frustrated her independent spirit. This was not the distant, business-like arrangement she had expected when she accepted his proposal. William had become genuinely invested in her well-being, and that of the child, a child that wasn't even his by blood. 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night, Madeline woke to a sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, clutching at the bedsheets. William was instantly awake. "Madeline, what's wrong?" "The baby," she whispered as another pain gripped her. "I think it's coming." William was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his clothes. "I'll send for the doctor and Mrs. Miller." "Hurry," Madeline said, fear evident in her voice. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks. William leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You'll be fine. Both of you, I promise." As he rushed to send a ranch hand for the doctor and the midwife, Madeline tried to calm her racing heart. She had heard stories of difficult births, of mothers and babies who didn't survive. Her own mother had died in childbirth when Madeline was just 10 years old. Clara Miller arrived first, her experienced hands efficient as she prepared the bedroom and examined Madeline. "The baby's definitely coming," she confirmed. "But first babies often take their time. Try to rest between the pains." William paced outside the room, his face drawn with worry. When the doctor finally arrived 2 hours later, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon. "How is she?" William demanded as soon as the doctor entered the house. "Let me examine her, and I'll let you know," Dr. Martin said calmly. The hours that followed were the longest of William's life. He paced the hallway, flinching at each of Madeline's cries, powerless to help her. Matthew arrived mid-morning, bringing coffee and awkward words of encouragement. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," Matthew said, patting his brother's shoulder. "She's strong, she'll be fine." It was near noon when a different sound reached William's ears, the thin, angry wail of a newborn. He froze in place, his heart hammering in his chest. The bedroom door opened and Clara Miller emerged, her face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Stanford. You have a son." William's legs nearly gave way beneath him. "And Madeline, tired but well. She's asking for you." He entered the bedroom on unsteady legs. Madeline lay propped against pillows, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in a white blanket. "William," she said softly, "come meet your son." He approached the bed cautiously, almost reverently. When Madeline pulled back the edge of the blanket to reveal a tiny red face with a shock of dark hair, William felt something shift inside him, a fierce, protective love unlike anything he had ever experienced. "He's perfect," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "Would you like to hold him?" Madeline asked. Carefully, as if handling the most precious and fragile treasure in the world, William took the baby in his arms. The child squirmed, then settled, his tiny hand escaping the blanket to wrap around William's finger. "Hello, little one," William said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your pa." The simple declaration brought tears to Madeline's eyes. In that moment, any lingering doubts about William's commitment to her child vanished. This was not a man honoring an obligation or fulfilling a duty. This was a father meeting his son for the first time. "What shall we name him?" she asked. William looked up, surprised. You haven't decided? I thought we should decide together, Madeline said. William looked down at the baby, then back at his wife. How about James, after your father? Fresh tears welled in Madeline's eyes at this unexpected gesture of respect for her family. James William Stanford, she said. If that's all right with you. It's perfect, William agreed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. As he returned the baby to Madeline's arms, their hands touched, and a current of understanding passed between them. This child, born of another man's blood but claimed by William's heart, had forged a bond between them stronger than any marriage vow. Thank you, Madeline whispered. For what? William asked. For giving him your name, for accepting him as your own. William sat on the edge of the bed, his hand still touching the baby's. He is my own, he said simply. From the moment I held you both in my heart, he became mine. The words were a declaration of love, though neither of them named it as such. But as they sat together, marveling at the new life they had jointly welcomed into the world, both knew that what had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into something far more profound. News of young James William Stanford's birth spread quickly through Stockton. Gifts and well-wishes arrived from neighbors and townspeople. Even Matthew, typically reserved, seemed captivated by his tiny nephew, bringing a hand-carved wooden horse as a gift. For when he's older, Matthew explained gruffly. William moved a cradle into their bedroom, wanting to keep the baby close during those first precious weeks. He surprised Madeline with his willingness to help with night feedings, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, changing diapers with growing confidence. You're a natural father, Madeline observed one evening, watching William rock the baby to sleep. It's easy to love him, William replied, gazing down at the sleeping infant. Then, more quietly, and his mother. The words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge them directly but both feeling their truth. It was a week after James's birth when Thomas Reynolds made one final appearance at the Stanford ranch. William was in the barn checking on a sick calf when he heard a commotion from the house. He emerged to find Thomas on horseback in the yard, clearly drunk, shouting for Madeline. White-hot rage coursed through William as he strode toward the house. Madeline stood on the porch, James clutched protectively in her arms, her face pale with fear and anger. Get off my property, Reynolds, William called, positioning himself between the drunk man and his family. I just want to see my son, Thomas slurred. My blood, my boy. He's not your son, William said coldly. He's mine. Now leave before I make you leave. Thomas swayed in his saddle, his hand dropping to his gun. You stole my woman, my child. I should shoot you where you stand. Madeline gasped, clutching James tighter. The baby began to wail, sensing the tension. Madeline, go inside, William ordered, not taking his eyes off Thomas. William, now, Madeline, he insisted, his voice brooking no argument. Reluctantly, she retreated into the house with the crying baby, though he knew she would be watching through the window. You're drunk, Reynolds, William said evenly. Go back to town and sleep it off. Don't tell me what to do, Thomas snarled, drawing his gun with an unsteady hand. I'll kill you and take what's mine. William stood his ground, unarmed but unafraid. You pull that trigger and you'll hang. Is that what you want? To die for a woman who doesn't want you and a child who will never know your name? Thomas's hand wavered, uncertainty crossing his face. The boy has my name, William continued, his voice steady. My blood doesn't run in his veins, but my name is on his birth certificate, and my love is in his heart. That makes him more mine than yours will ever be. Thomas's arm dropped, the gun pointing at the ground. You really love them, don't you? He asked, something like wonder breaking through his drunken haze. More than my own life, William answered without hesitation, Thomas holstered his gun, a shadow of shame crossing his face. "Tell Maddie. Tell her I'm sorry for everything." William nodded once, acknowledgement but not forgiveness. That wasn't his to give. Thomas turned his horse, then paused. "Take care of them, Stanford, better than I would have." "I will," William promised. "Every day of my life." They watched as Thomas rode away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the dust settled in his wake, William felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Thomas Reynolds was finally out of their lives. When he entered the house, he found Madeline in the parlor, rocking a now quiet James. She looked up as he approached, her eyes questioning. "He's gone," William said simply, "and he won't be back." Madeline nodded, relief evident in the loosening of her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, "for protecting us." William knelt beside her chair, his hand gently stroking James's dark hair. "Always," he promised. Then, gathering his courage, he added, "I love you both, Madeline. I should have said it before, but I was afraid it was too soon, that you might not feel the same." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. "Oh, William, I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood up in church and saved me from humiliation. Every kind word, every gentle touch, every moment you've treated James as your own has only deepened those feelings." William took her free hand and pressed it to his lips. "I never expected to find love like this. When I proposed to you, I thought I was doing a good deed, offering protection to a woman in need. I never imagined how completely you would change my life, my heart. And I never imagined finding true love after such betrayal," Madeline said softly. "You've healed wounds I thought would never close, William. You've given me a home, a family, and a love I can trust." William leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, reverent kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. James squirmed between them, as if sensing the significance of the moment. "I think he approves," William said with a smile, stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. "He's a very wise young man," Madeline agreed, her eyes shining with happiness. "Just like his father." The years that followed were filled with the joy and challenges of building a life together. The Stanford Ranch prospered under William's steady management, expanding its holdings and becoming one of the most successful cattle operations in the county. Madeline transformed the large white house into a true home, warm and welcoming to all who entered. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with William's quiet strength and Madeline's gentle heart. No one looking at the devoted father and son would ever question their bond, and James never had reason to doubt that he was William's beloved child in every way that mattered. 2 years after James's birth, Madeline gave birth to twin girls, Elizabeth and Catherine, who had their father's gray eyes and their mother's auburn hair. William doted on his daughters, already warning away potential suitors despite their infant status. "They're not courting until they're 30, he declared, cradling one tiny girl in each arm. "At least 25, Madeline negotiated, laughing at his protective instincts. Matthew eventually married Clara Miller's niece, Sarah, who had stayed on as Madeline's helper after the twins were born. They built a larger cabin on the ranch property and soon added 2 sons of their own to the Stanford family. Thomas Reynolds was occasionally mentioned in news from town. He had moved to California, unsuccessfully sought gold, then found work as a saloon keeper. No one in the Stanford household spoke his name aloud, though Madeline sometimes said a quiet prayer that he had found some measure of peace. On their 5th wedding anniversary, William surprised Madeline with a gift, the deed to a small parcel of land adjacent to the ranch. "What's this for?" she asked, puzzled. "Read it," he urged. The deed was for 5 acres of land with a small pond, officially named Bennett's Rest in honor of her father. "I thought we could plant a garden there," William explained. "Flowers, trees, a place for the children to play." a memorial to your father and a celebration of our family." Tears filled Madeline's eyes as she embraced him. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding how much he still means to me." "He gave me you," William said simply. "I owe him everything." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. William's arm was around Madeline's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "You ever think about that day in the church?" she asked. "When Thomas didn't come and you offered to take me home?" "Sometimes," William admitted. "I remember how beautiful you looked in your wedding dress and how terrified. I wanted to punch Reynolds and comfort you at the same time. Why didn't you tell me then that you'd had feelings for me before?" Madeline asked, a question she had wondered about for years. William was silent for a moment. "I didn't think you'd believe me. You were hurting, betrayed. The last thing you needed was another man professing feelings when you were vulnerable. So you offered marriage as a practical arrangement instead," Madeline mused. "It seemed kinder," William said. "And I was afraid of rejection. What woman leaves one man at the altar only to fall in love with another on the same day?" Madeline smiled. "It wasn't the same day. But it wasn't long after." She turned in his arms to face him. "I started falling in love with you the day you brought that rocking chair to the porch. Such a simple thing, but it showed me you were thinking about my comfort, about the baby. No one had ever considered my needs so thoughtfully before." William brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I fell in love with you the first time I saw you standing in my kitchen, determined to make a home here despite everything. Your strength amazed me. We've built a good life, haven't we?" Madeline said, gazing out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. "The best," William agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And we're just getting started." As they sat in comfortable silence, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A journey that began with heartbreak and desperation, but had led to a love deeper and truer than anything she could have imagined. She had been left at the altar, pregnant and alone. But a quiet cowboy had stepped forward and said, "I'll give your child my name." In doing so, he had given them both so much more: a home, a family, and a love that would last a lifetime. From the nursery came the soft cry of one of the twins. William squeezed Madeline's hand. "I'll go," he said, rising from the swing. "You rest." Madeline watched him go, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Not as a damsel in distress, but as a partner, giving her the strength and support to save herself. She looked up at the star-filled sky, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought her to this place, this life, this love. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had become the greatest blessing of her life, a true marriage of hearts, built on respect, kindness, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a lonely sound in the vast prairie night. But inside the Stanford home, there was only warmth and family, and love, a love that had been unexpected but had proven to be the most precious gift of all.